qual é esse Peter Marques falando aí? Assistindo Porcaria Posicionamento, questionável, webcam, parte 18, dia 24/5/2025. Foda-se. Foda-se o que vocês vão ver a camiseta do Pirute agora, caralho.
Thanks a ton. Along with that, look at this amazing fan art. Like my little king.
Existe fazer você mesmo e existe fazer você mesmo. É a diferença entre ser criativo
In the last video where I talked about cursed images, I said that if it got 15,000 likes, then I would make another video on it. 7 months later, it's currently sitting at 22,000 likes, so here you go. If this video isn't satisfying enough, and you want me to make another video on finding the origin of cursed, weird pictures, then let's shoot for 20,000 likes on this one. Also,
não sendo a maioria do tipo produzidas para serem postadas diretas no subreddit, né?
Before or after this video, thank you. The first picture I'll be talking about is of a bunch of people dressed up as Winnie the Pooh. The first thing that came to my mind was that if there was some sort of Winnie the Pooh fan club gathering thing, then it would be pretty easy to find this event online. Unfortunately, there was little to no answers in regards to this picture's backstory. What I did come across was this little excerpt from some website in 2014, and it says this. The apocalypse is here, and it started in Kazimierz Dolny, Poland, where hundreds of Pooh streamed out of the 100-acre wood in search of honey. This was my first lead. Apparently, this picture was taken in some Polish town, but once again, I found nothing. There was different posts on places like 9gag and Twitter that talked about some international Winnie the Pooh gathering that happens in Poland, but there's literally no other information I could find about it. This one Reddit post was asking about the image, and even confirmed that the picture was taken in Kazimierz Dolny, Poland. You can see it in this Google Street View. It's the same place. At this point, I was starting to consider that the image might be fake. I mean, there was little to no information about the actual event, and something like this almost feels too silly and too good to be true. And if this occurrence were to have ever occurred, I would have definitely found some other alternative pictures and angles of this. The last thing I did was put this picture into photo forensics, which can pretty much detect when an image is altered by looking through its metadata and other smart stuff. Sure enough, any use of Winnie the Pooh in the cursed image was highlighted and outlined with purple, which leads me to believe that this is indeed fake. I couldn't find a Mad who created and uploaded this picture, but they most likely took a bunch of different shots of themselves in the Winnie the Pooh costume and pretty nicely put it into the original photo of this Polish town. And while on the topic of finding the origins to stuff, let me ask a quick question. What if someone were to find your social security number as easy as it is finding a cursed image? Let me cook. Today's video is sponsored by Aura, and I believe it's a pretty important time to be talking about them because hackers may have stolen the social security. You can go to aura.com/jadedsalads to try 2 weeks for free. I recommend it. In another series I have, which is about finding the origins to liminal space images, I once found where this mouth room came from. That ended up being at a museum in Costa Rica, while this cursed image was taken in, well, let's start from the beginning. We have this picture, which has some fancy people inside of a massive mouth. If you're into vor, then this may be your next dream vacation. It turns out that this cursed image is from a stock photo website called Alamy. The title of this picture is Queen Beatrix of the Netherlands takes a look at the exhibition Corpus Journey Through the Human Body in the Netherlands. So, there you have it. The lady in this is the former Queen of the Netherlands, and she was at this museum back in March of 2008. Thankfully, as far as I know, this exhibit of the museum is still around, and it looks pretty cool. The museum is called Corpus and is located in Netherlands.
What?
To some people, this image may be wholesome and just a pic of some guy
Porra.
enjoying his My Little Pony hobby, but regardless of what you say, it's still pretty cursed. I tried putting this picture into the 10i picture search, and it gave me some results from a DeviantArt page back in 2013. Unfortunately, whenever clicking on these links, the pages are no longer available. I even tried putting the links into the Wayback Machine, but got no luck there. So what I ended up doing was highlighting a part of the file name that I found from 10i and then putting that into Google. When searching that, I was somehow met with the Forsaken DeviantArt page that I couldn't access.
Meu
Since many
Deus.
ask for a size comparison of different models and something else to relate their size to, I am with them page. Derpy is holding a DVD. I even dragged Clay Pinky onto the picture. I'm not that dramatic. I would make so many things different now if I did it again, but oh well.
The origins of this cursed image just goes back to some brony showing off his My Little Pony collection, and props to him because they don't look bad. They look pretty well crafted. It's just that the mask looks pretty uncanny. I'm not a fan of the mask. The next picture is of a person walking up a staircase made of sliced bread. Thankfully, the origins to this weren't insanely hard to find. If you look closely in the bottom right of this usage of the picture,
Meat
there's
wreck.
some text that reads meat wreck. I then looked into
Meu
meat wreck
Deus.
and came across this article written by Vice. These bewildering but beautiful photos boggle the mind. The article is pretty much about this artistic duo called Studio Meat Wreck. They specialized in creating some pretty surreal, humorous, and experimental photography. Especially human, the team is unafraid to use their own bodies, which may kick flesh with veins and hair, to forward the style of the Meat Wreck project. It is within the space of boldness and decisive editing that lies the sweet spot where Studio Meat Wreck can play out its oddball fantasies, aestheticizing the contradictory, making everyday life unusual, and delivering their own artistic voice. Meat Wreck has a lot of other pictures that can definitely be classified as cursed, but the bread stairs may be their magnum opus. Sadly, it seems like Studio Meat Wreck is now a thing of the past, as their Instagram has been inactive since March of 2019, and their website is no longer available. One of the more popular cursed images on the list is the Snow Dog picture. I personally recognize this one from the Boyhood album cover, an album by Birthday, or Signed Crush's Motorist. But Birthday, the musician, did not take this picture, as it actually dates back all the way to 2003. In December of that year, this picture would be taken of a dog named Miktar. I'm sure I'm not pronouncing that right, I'm sorry. While writing this part of the video, I came across this page on a website called The Breeding Archive. To my surprise, it has the Snow Dog's entire life pretty much written onto the page. Miktar was born on April 27, 1996, and would live until 2004, whenever he would pass away to liver failure. May he rest in peace. During his life, this dog would have a child in May of 2004, but the puppy would sadly pass away just 8 months later at random. I guess bigger dog breeds just have a tendency to die randomly, I don't know. Going back to the breeding archives for the Snow Dog, I think it's pretty fascinating that the entire family tree of Miktar has been documented, and it goes
Caralho.
back as far as the early 1970s. You can see this dog's entire ancestors and family history. Like, I didn't know this existed. I'm not really sure what else to add, but F's in the chat for the Snow Dog and his kid. For the next cursed picture, we have this legend. When researching this image, I didn't come across much of anything until I found a guy doing the exact same thing in the exact same kitchen. Either there's a content house full of dudes doing this, or there's something much more sinister going on. Something like an upside down house in the middle of Russia. That's exactly what this is. I found what seems to be a Russian reviewing website, and on this page of an upside down house attraction, there's different pictures taken of the kitchen scene in the cursed images. Sadly, my idea of a content house full of dudes doing this is not reality. If you care to visit this place in the future, then make a trip to the Upside Down House in Kabardinka, Russia. I will say that I don't know if it's actually still around in 2024, as the last review I saw dates back to August of 2022, so that's a whole 2 years that something could have happened. Maybe this place blew up, who knows. Along with this, you should also note that the reviews on this page are pretty negative. You have people calling the place overpriced, nasty, feelings of rocking around, not very conveniently located, and even uninteresting. One more side note, by the way, I guess upside-down houses are fairly common in Russia as some sort of wacky attraction. I stumbled onto this TripAdvisor page for one of these houses in Moscow, and the reviews are much kinder than the first one I just talked about. So maybe take a detour from the one in Kabardinka and go to the upside-down house in Moscow, Russia. It seems like a better time. This next entry is one of my favorite cursed images of all time. I tried covering this one in the last video I made, but for some reason I fumbled the bag and couldn't find its backstory. Luckily, here I am, and you're about to learn. This photo is commonly known as Dad's Giving, or according to Know Your Meme, that's what it's called. I give all my credit for this part of the video to Know Your Meme. Shout out to them. They're cool guys. The photographer behind this legendary picture is Chris Maggio. Similar to Studio Meatret, Chris is very talented at creating very experimental, avant-garde, and boundary-pushing art. I also didn't know this, but this guy actually took the picture for this 100 Gex album cover. I just thought that was pretty cool. I had to mention that. Going back to Dad's Giving, here's some other pictures taken from this legendary photo shoot.
Meu Deus! Cristo!
This one is my second favorite. And as it turns out, Chris is actually behind a lot of other popular cursed images. I found an old Vice article from December of 2013, and it features some of Chris's best and recognizable work. You have the dudes eating food on the floor with the guy in the window, the Cheeto wreath, and the list goes on and on and on. Chris is still around and still uploads some peculiar imagery to his Instagram, so that's there if you'd like to check it out. We have to pay respects to a cursed images legend. The last picture I'll be covering is this one right around and still uploads some food on the floor with the guy in the window, the Cheeto wreath, and the list goes on and on and on. Chris is still around and still uploads some
Bora encontrar. Bora encontrar. Bora encontrar com todo maluco aí. Achamos. Agora fica a dúvida. A gente encontra o Dad's Giving aí. Caralho. Velho. Esse aqui a gente tem que... Eu vou ter que fazer um vídeo à parte. Ó aqui a capa do 100 Gex. Esse cara aqui a gente vai ter que fazer eu vou ter que fazer uma live à parte só vendo as fotos do cara, tipo, porque... Porra! Porra! Do caralho! É isso, isso aqui vai ter o seu... Esse cara vai ter só a live à parte só dele, porque puta que pariu, caralho.
peculiar imagery to his Instagram, so that's there if you'd like to check it out. We have to pay respects to a cursed images legend. The last picture I'll be covering is this one right here.
My work is easy because I use ClickUp. Here's how I keep track of all my tasks. I start by brain dumping everything I need to get done in a list view. Next, I set a priority and a due date to keep things on track. I create custom statuses to
Vai tomar no cu.
Originally uploaded to BuzzFeed in the early months of 2011, this article featured a variety of
Jesus
pictures of this
Cristo,
guy
porra.
and his ladies.
Honey Bear. She likes to read books sometime. I think she is a bookworm. Sasha Rabbit to bell dance.
Because of the BuzzFeed article that pretty much outed this random dude's fetish for stuffed dolls, it briefly blew up on the internet that year. It spreaded to random forum boards where people would feel sympathy for the lonely guy, or just be amazed that this actually exists. I did find the origins of these pictures, as when you click the link at the bottom of the BuzzFeed article, it takes you to a now defunct Flickr page that's called Honey Bear Doll. My theory is that this guy was just uploading the now infamous pictures to his Flickr account with no intent of a bunch of people finding out, and then quickly privating everything when it eventually blew up. I did try putting the page into the Wayback Machine, just to see what it looked like back then when the pictures were still on the page, but that did not work out. The main thing I have to say for this one is that there were apparently some stop-motion animations of the dolls doing various activities like skateboarding and even riding bikes. Unfortunately, these videos are now privated or deleted, I don't know where they would be, so it's lost media. This guy's collection was pretty big, and I'm just left wondering what he's up to in 2024, and if the dolls are still around. If this guy's happening to watch the video, I hope you're doing good. This is cool. Thank you for sticking around until the end of the video, and thank you to Aura for sponsoring it. As always, thank you to everybody who makes and sends me fan art. It always looks freaking awesome. You already know how this goes. And shout out to everybody on the Patreon. African Sugars, Basmic, Bella M, Big Jickle, Damn.
Au. Peraí. Burro. Oh, puta merda, vocês querem sentir dor? Vocês assistem os vídeos desse cara.
Fala pessoal, tudo bom com vocês? Aqui é Nostalgia, sejam todos bem-vindos a esse canal. E lá estava eu preparando mais um enredo de mais um vídeo para o canal, que será focado em pirataria brasileira, mas pesquisando mais além eu vi que existem alguns casos bem bizarros envolvendo pirataria que não são relacionados ao Brasil, mas sim a outros países. E aí eu pensei, bom, por que eu não pego esses casos e faço um vídeo aqui pro canal, né? Enquanto meu outro vídeo não está pronto, provavelmente vai demorar um pouco para ele estar aqui no canal. Então se você gosta bastante desse tema, fique aqui porque eu sei que você vai amar esse vídeo. O primeiro caso é assim bem bizarro, né? A que ponto chegamos? Dá uma olhadinha aqui nesse jogo. Ele se chama Aladdin vs USA, que seria um jogo portátil supostamente criado por uma empresa chinesa chamada Panyu Gaming. Mas digamos que essa informação carece de fontes, porque como é algo pirata, não dá pra saber 100% quem que começou a produzi-lo, ou da onde veio essa bizarra ideia. Devido à falsificação em massa na China, não dá pra saber exatamente quem criou, né? Mas acreditam que sejam essa empresa. Além disso, esse joguinho recebeu 2 versões diferentes. Não que mudasse o jogo, apenas a carcaça dele. E eu nem preciso explicar muito aqui que o jogo é baseado naquele acontecimento de setembro de 2001. Tanto é que na embalagem, que eu não posso mostrar muito bem aqui, aparecem imagens do tal ocorrido. E o mais engraçado é que na embalagem tá aqui, ó, para crianças com mais de 5 anos de idade. É claro que esse joguinho aqui gerou muita controvérsia. Eu nem preciso dar muitas explicações aqui. Ele chegou a ser banido em algumas cidades. Ele foi banido em cidades da Inglaterra e, claro, dos Estados Unidos. No joguinho você controla um submarino que atira em jatos de combate que estão voando e conta com 20 níveis diferentes. E é claro que a cada nível que passa vai ficando mais difícil, como já é esperado. Mas olha só, o negócio é tão falsificado que as instruções na parte de trás da embalagem parece que foram retiradas de um outro jogo que não tem nada a ver com isso. Colocaram só por colocar para ter alguma coisa. Vai vendo, mas também vai escrever o quê? Na verdade, esse jogo também é uma cópia de um outro jogo que se chama Submarine Battle, que seria um jogo do início da década de 80. E esse jogo em específico já foi várias vezes pirateado por várias empresas clandestinas. Essa não foi a única vez que ele sofreu com isso. Essa aqui, em específico, também passou dos limites, né? Também não é explicado se o jogo é pro ou anti-Estados Unidos. E olha só que bizarro, esse joguinho se tornou popular entre as crianças paquistanesas, por mais que ele seja um jogo controverso. Muitos diziam que esse jogo era controverso porque ele poderia desensibilizar as crianças sobre o que aconteceu. E pasmem, vocês sabiam que já encontraram esse joguinho à venda em uma loja nos Estados Unidos? Foi daí que o assunto ganhou repercussão. Como assim estão vendendo isso nos Estados Unidos? Alguém por acaso já se deparou com isso no Brasil? Eu nunca me deparei com isso em lugar nenhum. Eu achei algo bem bizarro. Quem pegou a década de 80 ou até mesmo o início da década de 90 sabe que Tartarugas Ninja foi um grande fenômeno. E a sua popularidade não era apenas em seu país de origem, incluindo, por exemplo, o Brasil, já que o desenho fez muito sucesso. É claro que tinham inúmeros brinquedos, tinha item de festa de aniversário, jogos, revistinhas e tudo que há direito, entre muitas outras coisas, como roupas, fitas de vídeo e por aí vai. Tivemos uma musiquinha das Tartarugas Ninja.
Credo!
Tivemos. Muitos chamam esse momento de Turtle Mania, porque foi algo muito popular em muitos países ao mesmo tempo. Até mesmo em países soviéticos. E aqui o nosso foco é na Rússia. Na Rússia, resolveram lançar um livrinho das Tartarugas Ninja. E por que não? A princípio parece uma ideia muito boa, já que era um fenômeno de audiência e as crianças gostavam muito. Sendo assim, eles lançaram de uma forma não oficial, eu nem preciso explicar o motivo aqui, uma série de livros infantis das Tartarugas Ninja. Ao todo eram 33 dois livros que contavam historinhas envolvendo as tartaruguinhas, mas digamos que era tudo de uma forma bem bizarra, como vocês podem ver nas imagens. Até parece, sabe aqueles sonhos aleatórios que a gente tem? Não parece? Quando a gente sonha com um desenho animado, só que acontecem coisas bizarras, sei lá. Isso aqui me parece um sonho muito doido. Os livros foram publicados por uma tal de Minsky Publishing em algum momento entre o final da década de 80 e início da década de 90. E não existem muitas informações a respeito dele. Tudo que nós temos são algumas imagens, que eu não sei se eu chamo isso aqui de obra de arte.
É obra de arte, é arte suprema. Isso aí é arte total, total, total.
Que fazem muros com a turma da Mônica. É claro que isso aqui não é nada oficial, mas também não deu em nada, né? E em várias historinhas nós temos aparições de outros personagens fazendo uns crossovers bem doidos. Como por exemplo, nós temos o Predador, nós temos o Batman. Sim, nós temos uma historinha onde aparece o Batman. E nossa, essas ilustrações aqui dessa historinha do Batman, quando eu vi pela primeira vez, misericórdia. Não basta apenas usar um personagem sem direito autoral nenhum, tem que usar vários outros. Falam que tem personagem inspirado em Freddy Krueger, Jason, tudo de uma maneira extremamente bizarra. Alguém aqui já conhecia isso? Eu não sei se eu fico com dó ou se eu dou risada dos traços. A gente sabe que no Brasil existiram vários consoles que vinham com os joguinhos de Nintendinho. E não foi apenas um, foram vários. Tudo por causa da lei de reserva de mercado. E para quem gosta desse tema, eu já tenho um iceberg onde eu falo de todos os consoles brasileiros. E lá eu falo desses consoles que
Os famiclones.
como algo pirata. E no Brasil, assim como em outros países, eles eram lançados com nomes diferentes. Por exemplo, Dynavision, que teve mais de uma versão, era tudo a mesma coisa, só mudava a carcaça.
Então, presta atenção, compre um Dynavision radical da Dynacom.
Mas, digamos que a Venezuela foi longe demais nessa história, e eu acho que a Nintendo tem raiva da gente por causa disso também, né? Será? Lá vamos nós. A Venezuela simplesmente decidiu que teria uma empresa que lançaria o seu console com jogos e que se chamaria Nintendo. Sim, Nintendo com o logo da Nintendo, mesmo não sendo a Nintendo oficial.
Aqui parece de limão, é de groselha e tem gosto de tamarindo.
Agora imaginem a reação da Nintendo quando descobriu isso. A Nintendo da Venezuela, também conhecida como Nintendo Corporación Anônima, acho que é assim que fala, seria uma produtora de Nintendinhos, incluindo o console e os cartuchos. Antigamente, né, quando a Venezuela estava de vento em popa, estava tudo de boas na Venezuela, videogames como Atari, Sega, Nintendo eram encontrados em várias lojas, em shoppings, tudo normal, né, original, porém, no final da década de 80, o país entrou em uma crise econômica e ninguém mais tinha dinheiro para comprar um jogo original. Foi aí que tiveram a ideia de baratear os custos, mas digamos que isso não foi da forma mais legalizada possível, pois nesse momento surge a Nintendo CA, que eu vou chamar de Nintendo CA, ok? Que agia como se fosse a Nintendo oficial. Como na época o mundo não era tão globalizado como nos dias de hoje, o país estava em crise, muita gente acreditava que de fato se tratava da Nintendo e que eram produtos oficiais. Eles operavam com o nome real da Nintendo, usavam a logo da Nintendo, tudo bonitinho. Você pega a caixa, até parece que é algo que de fato foi produzido pela Nintendo, mas não. Por ser algo clandestino, não existem muitas informações a respeito da empresa, da sua data de fundação, mas sabemos o nome do fundador dela, que é Israel Rapaport Hoffman. Eu acho que é assim que fala.
Caralho.
Ele começou a trabalhar nessa indústria de jogos lá no finalzinho da década de 70. Ele administrou a Atari Mundial, que vendia vários joguinhos piratas sob a marca Atari. Ele também fez isso com outras marcas, como Intellivision, que era chamada de Intelligent Games de Venezuela. Lá no final da década de 80, essa tal Atari Atari Mundial queria registrar a marca Nintendo para o mercado venezuelano, que era do Israel, né? Mas é claro que não deu certo. Ora essa, por que será, né? Se tratando da Nintendo. Quem que deu essa brilhante ideia? Se ele chegasse pra mim com uma ideia dessa, eu ia responder com um querido.
Não, você já tem, não precisa nem perguntar.
Mas mesmo assim, eles começaram a operar com esse nome. O que sabem é que no final da década de 80 já tinha Nintendo oficial. A Nintendo oficial já estava em vários países da América Latina, então tinha uma distribuidora para a Venezuela. E para diferenciar o clone do original, muitos revendedores se referiam ao Nintendo oficial como Nintendo o original. E aí a pessoa já sabia, esse é o original, né? Tô sabendo. Mas vocês acham que parou por aqui? Em 1992 ele quis mais uma vez tentar registrar a marca Nintendo. O burro não basta tentar uma vez se tratando da Nintendo, tem que tentar mais uma vez e dessa vez, ó, ele se lascou, porque a Nintendo da América interrompeu o procedimento e aí começou uma disputa entre as duas empresas. No final, claro, a falsa Nintendo da Venezuela teve que pagar uma bagatela de dinheiro para a Nintendo e o Israel teve que destruir todos os seus consoles falsificados que ainda não tinham sido vendidos. Moral da história, né? Se o cara tivesse talvez feito igual no Brasil, que fizeram no Division, tinham vários outros, né? Talvez, não teria dado tanto ruim pra ele. Mas o problema aqui do gênio é que ele queria usar o nome da Nintendo. Ele tentou uma vez, não deu, ele, vou tentar mais uma vez. Alguém aqui já ouviu falar dessa história? Quanto a esse caso aqui, eu fico sem palavras.
Super
Estamos
Mario.
falando de Super Mario World, que seria um jogo pirata lançado no Japão em 1986. Ele é considerado o primeiro título pirata não oficial da Famicom que foi documentado. E também o primeiro jogo voltado para adultos nessa categoria. E vocês devem pensar que o jogo tem alguma coisa a ver com Super Mario, né? Não. No jogo nós temos 3 personagens, um homem, uma mulher e um cachorro. Praticamente no jogo você tem que correr atrás da mulher e o cachorro fica te impedindo de você chegar próximo a ela. Resumindo, esse é o jogo esse que gerou muita controvérsia. Esse jogo apareceu em alguns scans de revistas, sendo vendido em algumas lojas por 6.800 ienes. E por conta desse alto preço, porque nós estamos falando de décadas passadas, o jogo se tornou extremamente raro. Quase ninguém comprou isso aqui. E também tem uma lenda urbana de que a Nintendo fez com que encerrassem as vendas desse jogo, destruindo cartuchos ou entrando em contato com as lojas, tudo para não sujar a imagem da Nintendo, né? Porque a Nintendo sempre teve essa imagem de jogos voltados para a família, a gente vê muito isso nos comerciais. A marca registrada da Nintendo é o Mario e a gente sempre vê que os jogos do Mario são todos voltados para a família, né? Para as crianças. Então existe esse rumor de que a Nintendo fez com que esse jogo não se popularizasse tanto. Mas olha só que doido. Apesar disso, ninguém sabe como, é um grande mistério, o jogo chegou na Argentina, isso no início da década de 90. E a partir daí, ele também era vendido junto com outros cartuchos piratas. Ninguém sabe até hoje como que esse jogo chegou lá e pronto. Isso é um grande mistério. Bora falar de mais um caso russo? Alguém aqui já ouviu falar de Pogo Bunny? Seria uma cópia mal feita de Sonic? Pogo Bunny foi um jogo criado pela desenvolvedora russa chamada Alawar.
Chato.
general, streaming music is just so much better than the old way of getting music. You gotta go all the way to the store. You drop $20 or more on an album that you didn't even know was gonna have more than one or two good songs. But now I just go on like Spotify or something and be like, this sucks, next band, this sucks, next band, this sucks, next band. Oh, okay, here we go. Or, you know, use the algorithms that have actually gotten pretty good at identifying what I'm going to like based on my past taste. That being said, though, there is something that I sort of miss from those days. That sense of mystery and discovery. Picking something out just because the art stood out to you on the shelf. Whether it be cool art, unique, goofy. I think at the time I saw Razor's album, Shotgun Justice.
Meu, essa capa é feia pra
Art that was like
caralho.
something an edgy 14-year-old drew on a notebook. Looking like an AOL antagonistic character portrait with a smiley face for ads. Then it turned out that the album was actually really good.
Fucking God! Caralho, eu não tô conseguindo mexer nessa porra, velho. Porra. Caralho. Porra. Caralho. Quem me dera fosse vermelho assim mesmo, tipo. Não é tão vermelho assim na vida real essa porra, velho. Ai, que. Caralho, porra, eu não consigo dormir. Ferro de câmera. Vai ser assim mesmo. Foda-se. Que é pra ser assim? Não vi diferença nenhuma. Tá, isso tá a mesma merda.
And then, you get to an indie record store and you might find something even more obscure. A foreign release or a rare bootleg from a band you like. Some CD that a local band spent all their pay from Sam Goody to make. Or maybe, some album that nobody has an idea what it is. Well, as one 4chan poster discovered, that sense of mystery is alive and well at your local thrift store. It was in 2014 that they came across a strange disc with the face of an animator. Ladies and gentlemen, this is the story of Chico Death Metal.
Ó. Vamos conseguir ajeitar a cor.
Cerveja amarga na praia.
Praia pé de escola. A cerveja. Tivesse é bom. Beba com moderação.
This video is sponsored by Raycon. There's this one restaurant that I like to go to after the gym. The food's great, but I don't know what it is about that spot. It seems like every time I go there, there's always someone that's just open mouth chewing so loud, like louder than the TV or anything else going on in there. I just want to stab myself in the ear like Kakihara from Chief Killer. But instead, I put in my Raycon everyday earbuds. Turn on noise isolation, put on a little Cannibal Corpse. There you go, lunch is saved. I use my Raycon earbuds basically every day when I'm going on walks, and their optimized gel tips make sure they're comfortable and stay in your ears, even when you're running. Like any serious love story, your Raycons are here for a good time and a long time, with 8 hours of playtime and a 32-hour battery life. Most importantly, you get amazing quality audio at half the price of other premium audio brands. And Raycon's everyday earbuds are used to feeling love. They've already gotten tens of thousands of 5-star reviews. Just click the link in the description or go to buyraycon.com/wang. You'll get 15% off your Raycon purchase plus free shipping. This is probably one of the most requested lost media stories for me to cover, and in the time since people started requesting it and now, it's no longer lost media. But let's go back to the start of the mystery. The story begins on a post on 4chan's music board in 2014. On July 21st, an anonymous user made a thread looking for information on a CD they had just purchased from a thrift store. It was entitled Death Metal and by a band called Panchico. This contained only 4 tracks lasting under 19 minutes. He recalled its unique cover had caught his eye, giving the impression of noise pop or vaporwave. Instead, he found that it was more akin to a lo-fi shoegaze. Because, with a title like Death Metal, that's of course what it would be. Intrigued, he searched for more information about this album online, but he was unable to find a trace of its existence at all. Hey, I picked this up because it looked interesting. I wasn't able to find any references to it online whatsoever. Even with super obscure bands, you might expect to find an old MySpace page or mention in some form. Does anybody recognize the album? This isn't some viral marketing bullshit. I'm just curious if anyone could shed some light on it, and I'm slightly excited by the prospect of owning a rare album. Immediately, people began asking for a rip so they could listen to it themselves, and OP obliged. Evidently, they quickly fell in love with this album, with the first response calling it a masterpiece. And as a result, they are now invested in learning more about this project, at least most of them. One of them remarked that it was horrible, and sounded like something someone who visits Mew would make. In agreement, another replied, it's almost like he used random art he found to push his shitty album. Even early on, there was a lot of suspicion that this was a publicity stunt. We'll go more into that later on. For those who believed in its legitimacy, there were a lot of unanswered questions. Where did this drawing on the album come from? Was the band's name related to Pachinko? But the most pressing mystery lied in the music itself. Before the upload finished, the OP mentioned that it sounded badly recorded. He described a consistent noise panning back and forth throughout the EP. This would become a point of debate over whether or not this was intentional. Okay, I think I'm going crazy. This sounds like the CD wasn't properly burned or was a weird dithering out. Maybe the noise isn't supposed to be there. In response, the OP insisted they were wrong. I think it's definitely supposed to be there. No way that would happen with 2000s technology. This date comes from the CD's liner notes, which he'd attached in an Imager album. It also credits the band's members, but unfortunately, in a move reminiscent of the Resident Evil 1 end credits, only their first names. Owain, Andy, Sean, and John. The only other clue came from the original poster. The CD had a sticker revealing that it had been purchased from Oxfam, a chain that only exists in the United Kingdom. So it was made in the UK by 4 people with very common first names. So not really much to go on. Shortly after, the OP disappeared and even deleted the photos he'd uploaded. So it wasn't long until the thread went inactive and expired. But the story of this mysterious album didn't die with it. Death metal continued to spread across the internet, passed around on various file sharing sites. And there were a few minor discoveries over here. The art was sourced to a manga named Mint Nabokura. It ran from May of 1997 to December of 1999, which didn't contradict the CD's original copyright. Still, many people remained convinced that this was nothing more than an elaborate hoax. People were adamant that such degradation wasn't possible. Take, for example, this commenter from a Reddit thread about the subject.
I'm dubious about the disk drop.
A heavily damaged CD will play with a lot of skips as the player tries to read the data and fails to do so. Or it would simply not play if the table of contents is damaged. Noise seems to have been laid over the original audio. In case you're wondering, I was actually surprised to find this out too. They're wrong about that. There are countless examples online of degradation from CDs found in similar quality. Of course, that didn't stop people from endlessly arguing about whether or not disk drop was a thing. But there were no actual developments until it was reposted.
That's great. With over 1,000 payment methods, multi-currency business accounts, and
to YouTube in August of 2019. The uploader wrote about its mystique in the description, even linking to the 4chan archive. It accumulated tens of thousands of views, exposing many to the mystery for the first time. Eventually, enough became interested that they formed a dedicated search effort. Their goal was to find a clean copy of this album and perhaps even other work the band had made. And just 1 month later, a Discord was created to document the information about the album. Their main lead at the time was from the original discussion. You see, while discussing Oxfam, one anon mentioned that they had actually seen it there before. They specifically recalled it being at a location in Southampton. The searchers emailed that specific shop. Only for staff to deny ever having had it in stock. But that didn't discourage them, instead exhausting the lead to its fullest extent. They began contacting every single musician in the area that shared a first name with the band. Unfortunately, this was also in vain. Every single musician they contacted either claimed to have no involvement in the project or just never responded at all. It all seemed hopeless, with many just contemplating throwing in the towel. But there's still one clue left that had gone largely unnoticed. The original post's image showed a blurry but still legible barcode on the CD. This, as it turns out, was not an ID for the item. Rather, it was for the person who gifted it. That meant that it was a direct lead to someone else who had physically possessed this album. It seemed promising, but there were already some immediate setbacks. It was already unlikely for Oxfam to have this information on record after such a long time, but even if they did have it, they're not just going to dox the person who gave them the CD. That would be very illegal due to UK privacy laws. And because of that, it was presumed a dead end and abandoned. That is, until January of 2020, when one user took a second look and inadvertently cracked the entire case wide open. By looking up Oxfam along with the last 4 digits, he found references to a location in Sherwood, Nottingham. This didn't shift their ability to get information about the code, because all the same laws still apply, but allowed the team to shift efforts to that area. And as a typical shot in the dark, one person sent a message to an Owain they found living in Nottingham. The Facebook profile appeared abandoned, but showed he had a background in music. Still, they could have never predicted that this actually was Owain, the lead singer of Panchico. And Owain, of course, was apprehensive at first. I mean, it's a pretty natural response to a random stranger on the internet asking about a project you'd abandoned 2 decades ago. But once he realized it wasn't a joke, he confirmed that he was indeed the Owain who sung on death metal. The fan went on to explain that this album had gained a cult following online, and people were desperate to get a clean copy of this recording. Shocked, he immediately reached out to the other members of Panchico. The following is an excerpt from Vice in which he recalls the conversations.
Have you seen this?
He wrote to Andy, who was with his girlfriend in Korea at the time. Andy was just like, bloody hell, he couldn't believe it, remembers Owen. Sean, who was now living in Cambridge, was next up. They lost touch with John years before. He was equally stunned. I hadn't listened to it for 20 years, Sean admits. But when I heard the track again, I was absolutely pleasantly surprised. The 3 men had long since abandoned their dreams of becoming famous musicians. Andy was the only one with a career in music at all, having become a sound engineer. Owain briefly pursued other artistic projects before moving on to education. And Sean, the bassist, became a tree surgeon. In a message posted on January 21st, the group confirmed that Owain had been contacted. He confirmed to them that the distortion wasn't intentional, but then in a surprise twist, revealed they had no intention of releasing a clean copy. This is because, as it turns out, they didn't have any. See, Panchico was made of childhood friends, and death metal was recorded while they were still in high school. This meant that they had little to no money and were forced to use cheap low-end equipment, which partially explains why the CD had deteriorated so much. Only 30 copies were ever made, and mostly just sent to journalists and record labels. Nobody responded, so after a second EP with similar results, they threw in the towel. By 2020, none of the original members had any copy of the CD. Andy, who had produced the CD, even found that the original masters had vanished, so it was somewhat of a bittersweet victory. They'd solved the mystery behind the band, but all hope of getting a clean copy of death metal was lost. That is, until February 3rd. By pure coincidence, one of Andy's friends managed to uncover a then-forgotten copy of the EP. This was in far better condition, having little to no disc drop, and because of this, Andy was able to transfer the CD and remaster the project. He also managed to find a copy of the band's second EP, Kicking Cars, which hadn't surfaced on it, and he decided to give it the same treatment so that it could be included alongside the original track list. The process took less than 2 weeks, with the remastered version releasing on February 16th of 2020. Death metal was, for the first time ever, publicly accessible in its intended quality. And you might think the story would end there, but there's actually still so much more to it. Within hours, it was downloaded so many times that it was one of the best-selling albums on Bandcamp that day. And shortly after, it was put on streaming services where it garnered even larger audience. With most unaware of its backstory, And they've only grown exponentially since, with over 600,000 monthly listeners at the time of this recording. And because of this newfound success, they've reformed as a band and even begun recording new music. In 2021, Panchico released their first single in over 20 years. Months later, they performed their first live show. And now they're doing international tours around the world. I'm actually going to be seeing them at Sick New World, which has one of the most chaotic mixes of bands I've ever seen. It's honestly fascinating how this story played out. It's just a slightly different timeline. That OP never purchased that scene, posted about it online. But because he did, now these childhood friends are back together again and playing music in front of crowds. Now before I end this video, there is something else interesting that I'd like to point out. In a lot of those early interactions, the band was conflicted about their newfound popularity. They would say stuff like, the past is the past. And to this day, they prefer the disc rock version of the album. To them, it was a relic of their teenage years. And so they found symbolism in its degradation. Owain elaborates on this in a message he sent early on. Now what I find interesting is, after listening to many videos on YouTube about the EP, I feel that the degradation of the CD is actually part of the music now. It is a part of why people enjoy the music. And whilst I try to look for an original copy, I feel like it may take something away from what people found in the music. Maybe it's best left how people found it as this interesting half-destroyed piece of music from a far-gone era. I think it's part of what makes it charming today, and that's what people should hold on to and enjoy about the CD. It's an interesting interpretation, especially coming from the artists themselves. And when you think about how many different things had to align for this to happen, it's kind of beautiful. And because of this, I'd like to recommend anyone who likes death metal to check out the original rip at least once. Maybe it'll change your view on the album, or, maybe it'll just hurt your ears.
Listen, I know a lot of you guys are total weeaboos.
Which means that the odds are that for a lot of you watching, there is nothing more that you would love than to have your own anime waifu. The 2D girls, they do what the 3D girls simply can't. But there you are, stuck here in your flesh prison. There's not all that much you can do about it except draw some doodles and get paper cuts. But somewhere out there, someone was living your dream. And that someone was a penguin. A Humboldt penguin in Japan named Grape. It's the greatest love story ever told, but it's not one without heartbreak and tragedy. So sit back while I tell you the story of Grapekun, a penguin with an anime waifu. In April 16th, 1996, the Hamura Zoo in Tokyo, Japan had a new arrival. A new baby Humboldt penguin. When he was born, he was identified only by the purple ring they put on his wing to identify him, so they gave him the name Grapekun. Humboldt penguins, which are a species native to South America, particularly Chile, could be like humans in a lot of ways, particularly when it comes to their relationships with other penguins. One day at the Hamura Zoo, Grapekun meets a female penguin named Midori, and his behavior is unmistakable. He bows his head and exchanges glances with her. He extends his head up, opens up his wings, and lets out a call. She reciprocates, and thus, now Grapekun and Midori are a couple. Humboldt penguins tend to be monogamous. When they find a partner, that's their partner for life, and Midori was Grapekun's partner for life. And unlike a lot of other zoo animals, they even got to travel together. In 2006, the Tobu Zoo completed their new penguin enclosure. But you can't have a penguin enclosure without penguins, so arrangements were made for some of the penguins from the Hamura Zoo to go to the Tobu Zoo, Grapekun and Midori being among the penguins making the move. And at first things are going great. Grapekun and Midori are adapting to their new surroundings, and they even have a son together named Hanpen. But here's where things start to go south. Hanpen was sent to the Edogawa Zoo to be raised by a foster mother. They never even got to see their chick, and this was a move made to prevent inbreeding. Although ironically, Hanpen would wind up mating with his foster mother. I guess he had 2 broken wings. There's no way to know for sure, but some have theorized that the separation from their chick had damaged the relationship between Grapekun and Midori. But what really sealed the deal is what happened later in 2010. In 2010, Grapekun got sick, and for the duration of his treatment, he had to be separated from the other penguins at the zoo, including Midori. But the treatment is a success, and Grapekun has a long life ahead of him, and they return him to the enclosure. But when he comes back, something's changed. He returns to find that Midori has moved on with another male penguin, a younger male penguin named Denka. And in addition to finding that what was supposed to be his lifelong mate had abandoned him for a younger male, the rest of the flock also began to shun him. Once again, there's no way to know for sure what the penguins were thinking, but it's possible that this was because when he was taken away, they had believed he had died. So their Grapekun was stuck alone with all these other penguins who no longer wanted anything to do with him. Midori and Denka would have a chick of their own named Beer. This chick would not be sent to another zoo, but instead live in the enclosure with all of them. So for Grapekun, it would be 7 long years watching all the other penguins around him happily live their lives. While he sat there abandoned and alone, every day a reminder of the life he used to have and how things were supposed to be. But in April of 2017, everything would change. It was at this time that zoos across Japan began a collaboration with the anime series Kimono Friends. Kimono Friends tells the story of Japari Park, a zoo containing all different kinds of rare, legendary, and mysterious animals. And some of these animals become transformed into human versions of themselves, or friends. The series was a runaway hit beyond anyone's expectations, and it was believed that because of the show's popularity, the collaborations with the zoos would increase awareness about the animals and also bring more visitors to the zoos. And Great Quinn's home, the Tobu Zoo, would be one of these zoos. So for the collaboration, cardboard standees of the characters from the show would be placed all around the zoo. And in the Humboldt Penguin enclosure, the Humboldt Penguin character Fururu would make her home. From the very first day of the collaboration, visitors would notice the penguins staring at the anime. Noticing how much attention the penguin started to get, the zoo began to post about him and giving a little bit more of his story. His name is Grape Quinn. He's 20 years old, an old man in penguin years. He really likes her. Now, of course, it's really easy to sit there and look at animals behaving a certain way and you got this urge to anthropomorphize them. But these observations, a lot of times, are just us recognizing patterns that aren't really there and don't necessarily reflect what's actually going on in the mind of the animal. But what would happen next would be unmistakable. One day, while looking at Fururu, Grape Quinn would extend his neck up, stretch his wings out.
Abri uma conta na Novidade. Novidade? É, lá você usa o combo criador de aposta de...
And make a call. In other words, he was very clearly trying to court this anime waifu. Surely this was an absolutely baffling event for the staff to witness, but perhaps it was a welcome one for a penguin that was known to have such a sad past. So as this story spreads, the internet becomes obsessed with the weeb penguin with the anime waifu. All kinds of articles are being written about it, tons of fan art being created, and even the people behind the show are getting in on the fun, with Fururu's voice actress going to meet Grape Quinn in person. Although, if you judge by the green line analysis, the 3D one was simply no match for the 2D one. But then, tragedy strikes. A troubling image surfaces of Grape Quinn stuck behind the fence, separated from his love. Look at my man in penguin jail over here, imprisoned for the victimless crime of falling in love with an anime girl. Rumors began to spread that he had become so enamored with the cardboard standee that he stopped eating, which of course would lead to the worst people on the planet, the internet armchair veterinarians, to talk about how this is actually animal abuse for them to have the cardboard cutout there. But people began to think that he was put behind the fence so he didn't starve to death and they could feed him. The zoo would later clarify that he was eating just fine and the fence was put there so he wouldn't accidentally fall into the pool at closing. At other times, he was free to stare at his waifu to his heart's content. So for the internet armchair vets there, suck it, he was fine. So the collaboration between Kimono Friends and the zoos turns out to be a big success. Visitor counts are rising all over the place, especially at this zoo with people going from all over.
Pinguim otaku, porra.
He had become a massive attraction with exhibits made just to spotlight him. But eventually, the promotion would come to an end. And what this meant is all the cardboard standees around the zoo would have to be removed. What did this mean for Grape Quinn? What would happen to Fururu? Would she be removed? Would Grape Quinn be abandoned yet again? Ultimately, it was decided it would be best if she remained there indefinitely, even after...
Melhor não, o bicho é otaku fedido.
In the middle of September, the zoo staff became concerned that a coming typhoon might blow away the standee or destroy it. So they took her away for safekeeping, leading to one of the saddest images to come out of this entire ordeal. Look at that. His shoulders are slumped. He's just watching his waifu get taken away. Maybe forever. He doesn't know. But of course, it's better than the alternative where she potentially gets blown away or destroyed and he never sees her again. But of course, she would be returned to the enclosure after the weather improved. I don't like that bitch Midori. Grape Quinn didn't forget about it. You know, it's kind of funny to think, though, how through this story, there's definitely a lot of people who came to legitimately hate a penguin. And you do have to remind yourself that even though we're seeing all these human characteristics in the animals, it is still just an animal. You can't really get mad at it. And after all, it turns out 1/3 of female Humboldt penguins cheat on their mates. If just the way it is, and don't even get me started on the penguin prostitution. So with his anime waifu returned to the enclosure, and with GrapeCon still as popular as ever, on October 9th, the Tobu Zoo announced a 2-week special event celebrating the Autumn Grape Festival, which would be held that November. This turned out to be a case of some of the worst timing ever, because the next day, the zoo would share some bad news. Notice of cancellation of GrapeCon exhibition due to changes in physical condition of GrapeCon. We will cancel the exhibition from today. Bururu also moved with Grape. We apologized for any inconvenience. They announced that that day's GrapeCon exhibition had been canceled due to unexplained weight loss. But they did bring his waifu with him while he monitored his condition so he wouldn't be alone in the experience. Get well soon messages poured in, and people were hoping for the best. But humble penguins rarely live past 20 years old, and GrapeCon was already 21 years old. And sure enough, the next day, the Tobu Zoo reported that Grape had passed away.
It said.
By his side. Several pieces of fan art were made of Grape venturing off into the afterlife with his waifu. The zoo even set up a shrine where people could come pay their respects in person. And Mine Yoshizaki, the character designer for Kimono Friends, would gift an illustration to the zoo depicting GrapeCon and Fururu together. Fururu now wearing a purple armband, just like Grape. The standee of Fururu in the penguin enclosure has now been replaced by this art of Grape and Fururu together. In the grand scheme of things, GrapeCon and his anime waifu weren't together all that long, just half a year or so. A life longer and full of more hardship than the average penguin. He got the happy ending that so rarely happens in real life. And the story still continues to this day. The standee of GrapeCon and Fururu has attracted attention once more. Now, from a young penguin named Neku. Look at him try to get up on that rock. Who knows what his intentions are? Perhaps he wants to steal Fururu away like that bastard penguin Denka? Or maybe, he's just a penguin and he wants to peck at the cardboard. But in any case, that is the legend of GrapeCon. Working at an office can be a monotonous, soul-draining way to spend 40 hours or more of your week. But for a lot of people, it's a necessary evil if, you like to do things like eat food and live indoors. It's even more tedious if you go back to the days before ping pong table and Taco Tuesday style offices. The stuff you see on TikTok that looks like adult daycare. If you want to hold on to your sanity, you gotta find little things to break up the routine and experience just a little bit of joy. And what better way than with a good old-fashioned office prank? The thing is, though, while on TV, Jim Halpert can inflict endless amounts of psychological warfare upon his likely autistic coworker.
Identity theft is not a joke, Jim.
It's not always like that in real life. Take, for example, the story of a Canadian Redditor's office prank that leads to the Mounties getting involved.
What
leads
the
to
fuck?
A person almost dying. How did a simple office prank spiral this badly out of control? Let's find out in this episode of Tales from the Internet. Today's story was voted 2013's Fuck Up of the Year on r/TIFU. So you're probably expecting some kind of bodily fluids, some kind of weird sex stuff, some fashion of gross regret. This story has none of it, but I don't think I've ever seen something so seemingly innocent spiral so badly out of control. On May 28th of 2013, a user named Into the Wilder posts, TIFU playing a Think Geek practical joke. The Canadian FBI was called, and I nearly killed my 7-year career. I work as a loans officer in a rural branch of a small Canadian bank. Sorry for your suddenly sodden panties, ladies. As the intro might imply, this man is not exactly in love with his job. He explains that after losing his old job selling computers in his early 20s, he kind of just fell into this position. And unfortunately, he wound up actually being pretty good at it. He says that although he is well liked by the rest of the staff, his sense of humor doesn't really fit in with the rest of theirs, which has been a pretty frustrating thing for him and is ultimately what makes this turn into a big debacle. He also brings up his love of Think Geek. Now currently, Think Geek is a barely existent subsidiary of GameStop. If it ever has anything stocked at all, it's junk like off-brand chargers and earbuds. And the time just before that, it's mostly just Funko Pops and pop culture merch tie-ins like Funko Pops. And while that was always a part of the brand, the The further back you go, the more the focus was on things like weird toys and gizmos and gadgets. It was kind of like a throwback to those Johnson Smith things you never knew existed catalogs, but with a modern twist. Even just thinking about those catalogs made me stop working on this video for a couple hours just to look through old catalogs. Like, where else are you gonna find Billy Bob teeth, a demonic possessed hand, and a freaky flashing eye sunglasses all in one place? But back to Think Geek. Browsing the site back in the day was that kind of vibe. And Into the Wilder liked to decorate his office space with stuff from Think Geek. Examples he gave were the Conan the Barbarian letter opener, a Salvador Dali melting clock, and a magnetic levitating globe. He was constantly buying weird little knickknacks from the site, so come Christmas time, he's a pretty easy guy to shop for. And that year for Christmas, and the Christmas before the incident, his family got him one of the gadgets from that site that I probably thought about more than any other one, the Annoyatron. The Annoyatron, if you're not familiar, is a little prank device. There are a few different iterations of it over the years with a few different sound effects it has, but the core concept is always the same. It's a tiny little electronic device that you hide somewhere. Compare it to a quarter for scale. And every few minutes, set at an interval that you choose, it lets out a tiny, barely audible beep. I imagine that most of you have encountered something like this over the years from a normal non-prank device. You know, like a carbon monoxide detector or washing machine, something. So you know how maddening it can be with those devices that are way more obvious and easy to find. So imagine that with a device that's specifically designed to be annoying and hard to find, with a 3-month battery life. And then if somebody finally finds it, they got this weird little circuit board. They're left wondering what purpose it serves. By removing it, did you just break some crucial component of the office? People are going to lose their minds over this, but in a way that's ultimately pretty harmless. Or should be pretty harmless. So after thinking about it for a bit, he finally comes up with the perfect hiding spot for his Annoyatron. I came in early on a Monday and placed it behind a metal poster frame hanging on the wall in the office of one of my coworkers. I flipped the on switch and went blithely about my day, waiting for a reaction and to share a few chuckles. Considering he felt comfortable enough to go into this specific person's office and hide the Annoyatron, it was presumably one of the people there he had a better relationship with. So not much could go terribly wrong. You just go, hey, gotcha, with your office buddy, and go on with your day. That doesn't seem to be going as planned. Monday came and went. Nothing. Tuesday. Nothing. Wednesday and Thursday. Not a peep. At that point, I figured it was broken. Frankly, I kind of forgot about it. I had Friday off, and I suppose I would have checked it when I got back the following week. As the kind of person who double checks everything a million times, I'm kind of surprised he resists the urge to go back to the office and check the post just to make sure he really did turn it on, thereby risking incriminating himself. But he didn't do it. The long weekend comes and goes, and he shows up to work as usual on Monday. When everyone gets there, all 16 workers are called into the manager's office. They're going to have an unscheduled conference call, EP. At this point, Into the Wilder isn't really thinking much of it. Just going to be some kind of formality that probably could have been an email, a waste of time, but something you got to do when you work in an office. So the manager calls the district VP, who then introduces the head of security. And at that point, Into the Wilder starts to realize that this isn't a normal conference call. By now, the VP says, some of you know about the device that was found at your branch last week. Device? What the hell? What kind of device could they possibly be talking? Oh, holy Jesus fuck nuggets. When it was found on Thursday, nobody knew what it was. So it was brought to the branch manager, who then sent pictures of the device to me. Fuck. So the district VP forwards the pictures of the device to the head of security. The head of security isn't sure what this could be, but he suspects that it might be a listening device. But since he wasn't sure, he sends the pictures to the Canadian Security Intelligence Services, as well as the RCMP, aka the Mounties. As you may be aware, the Mountie always gets his man. Into the Wilder suddenly realizes the degree to which he is fucked. And it gets worse. The Canadian feds suspect that the little Annoyatron might be a bomb. So over the weekend, all the staff were told to stay home, and while they were gone, investigators swept the building to make sure that there were no more such devices hidden around. And at this point, hearing all this, Into the Wilder is panicking. Like, ooh, what's he gonna do? And really, what do you do? My opinion, keep it to yourself. I mean, at this point, you got the feds involved, you got the Mounties involved. They haven't gathered everyone in the office for a big dramatic reveal. You've made it this far, they probably have no idea that you're the one that put this behind that poster. And if they don't know by now, they probably never will. Just keep your mouth shut and we'll go away. So here's what he does. If I had sat down ahead of time to brainstorm a worst case scenario, I wouldn't have even come close to this epic corporate crapastrophe. I had no choice. I took a shaky breath, steeled my nerve, clenched my ass cheeks tight, and tried to say, "Excuse me," but choked out a pubescent squeak instead.
Work today is broken. We're all working on too many disconnected apps, and it's killing team productivity. But for the first time, there's a platform that fixes it by combining everything we do. Projects, chat, and knowledge in one place. It's all powered by the world's most powered AI, so you can find answers from anywhere and get work done faster. Introducing ClickUp, the everything app for work.
I cleared my throat, interrupted the conference call in that stuffy room full of my coworkers and spoke up, telling them it's a harmless noisemaker, taking responsibility and apologizing profusely. The room was dead quiet. The VP slowly says thank you for speaking up, they'll stop the investigation, and the call ends. Everyone files out. I asked the manager if she wants me to stay, but she says she can't talk to me right now. She doesn't talk to me for 3 weeks. And when she does talk to me, it turns out that her reaction, it was a bit more than just because, how embarrassing it was to have the office shut down for the week. Then rally her whole staff into the office for a meeting with the district VP, get corporate involved, get the Mounties involved, all for her to be standing in front of everybody when they find out, oh, this was just a silly prank machine from thinkgeek.com. See, what made this so much worse, the manager, not knowing what to do with this mystery device. She's driving home from the office and she has it in the passenger seat of her car. And when she's driving home from the office, that's when she gets a call from the feds saying,
"Hey, you know what little thing you got there sitting in your passenger seat? There's a possibility of that's a bomb."
At that point, she bursts into tears and nearly drives her car into a ditch. So yeah, I guess a bit of a cold shoulder is understandable. The district VP threw a fit, and despite my 17-year unblemished work record, she tried really, really hard to have me fired. By some miracle, one of the company higher-ups appreciated the joke and he winds up keeping his job. Luckily, they didn't charge me the $50,000 plus in lost business, staff wages, and other miscellaneous costs. No, I don't know why my manager didn't just ask her staff if anybody knew about it instead of sending a fucking urgent memo to the entire fucking universe. My office is full of a lot of things, but common sense isn't one. He concludes by saying that his days of office pranks are over. And amid all the comments wondering about, was this just a lie made up to have some viral marketing for ThinkGeek? A username MindTaker had a great suggestion. The only thing that would have made this better would be if they had found it and did all of this just to fuck with you. That would have been the perfect way to just flip this all back on him. All it needs is some J. Walter Weatherman type guy to lose his hand in the air. It also prompted a lot of people to share their own experiences with the Annoyatron. For example, you had one guy who had a friend place it in his room underneath his chair, which leads to removing every single object from his room one by one, including his TV and his computer, which he had to disassemble before moving it into the hallway. Ultimately, though, he never actually found the Annoyatron. He just kind of gives up on the search, and when he's trying to sleep, he just plays loud music. This goes on until the battery dies, and 3 years later, his friend admits that, yeah, so here's what I did. You have another guy who worked in an auto parts shop. He hides one near his boss's desk, and the boss, too, never finds it. He would just stand around with his coworkers and watch as he tried to find the beat. And then you got the former MySpace employee who had a coworker start tearing apart computers within an hour of an Annoyatron being planted. That being said, I'm sure some of you guys have stories with the Annoyatron. Let me know about them. I don't think the original ones are actually made anymore, but I did see some copies of them on Amazon. If my channel's analytics are to be believed, the majority of you watching are probably somewhere in your mid-20s or mid-30s. So you've probably experienced some loss in your life, but never really face down your own mortality.
Oh, fuck.
Do if you knew your cancer and given 6 months to live, she sat down and thought about what she wanted to do with her last months. And a decision was made: save as much music from obscurity as possible, but in particular, one song, a song that had been haunting her for years. So for this episode of Tales from the Internet, let's take a look at a piece of lost media, a Redditor's dying wish.